Hey friend, Dick Hardy here, ready to go for video number 2 in this great series, Church Boardsmanship, a pastor's guide to effective leadership. You know, we're getting great feedback, even after just the first video that just released, on the whole business of laying the foundation for a good board, a great board there at your church. And we told you at the end of that video that we were on video 2, which is this one. We're going to start talking about more specifically the roles with a board and a pastor. Now, if you can get confused a little bit between that setting the stage last time and this one, but just track with me on it. I think it'll become more and more clear. I mean, really what we're going to do here is we're going to try to help board members understand their roles and responsibilities. Of course, all of you have downloaded the PDF on the 18 rules of engagement. We're going to take some of those and we're going to flesh those out here for you today. Now, this will be true for both current board members and new board members. We're going to talk a little bit later about the whole business of orientation in a subsequent video, but we need to have the stage set for how board members should function in their role as a church board member. Now, let's set the stage for what the role is not. Okay, now there's a different way to get this thing started. Well, let's think about this. If we think, a church board is part of the governance of the church, and so if a board member gets elected, all of a sudden they go, okay, let me see if I can figure out this church government thing. Now, in our world, in Western society, we know the very best form of government is a democracy. And it really is. I mean, I'm grateful for the democracy we live in here in the United States, and for those of you in other countries around the world that have democracies. It's the very best form of human government. It's not perfect, but it's the very best thing that's been discovered over the ages for governing people from a human standpoint. So a board member says, okay, that's the way it works in our government. So let's think here, at least here in the States, we have what are called 3 branches of government. So, and we'll have a little civics lesson here. We have the executive branch. Okay, and the executive branch, everybody knows, is the president. Then we have the legislative branch. That's Congress. So that's the Senate and the House, the legislative branch. And we get that. And then we have the judicial branch. That's the Supreme Court. So we understand the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary. So a board member gets elected, and he understands government from a human standpoint, so he says, okay, now I'm part of the government of our church. So what this must mean is our pastor is probably like the executive branch. And I'm on the board, so I must be part of the legislative branch. And not a perfect one here, but if you're in a denomination, maybe your denomination headquarters or something is the judiciary. That's not a perfect illustration of it, but you get the picture. And so we think that's the way we're supposed to function. And let me tell you, this is not the way church government works. It's not the president, the legislature, and the courts. I mean, let's think about this. What's one of the two words we hear side by side when one branch of government, oh, by the way, what do we call this? We call this a system of checks and balances. And we like that in human government, that one can't just do this and then. But what happens when checks and balances go absolutely sideways? You know what you end up with? What do we say happens in Washington, for those of you who live in the States? It's called gridlock. When the Democrats and Republicans just aren't going to get along, and so they just go like this and they get nothing done. I mean, absolutely nothing. So here's what I'm going to suggest, and this is not a perfect, I'm not coming up with a perfect word on it, and don't get all theological worked up over me over this, but here's really what I'm going to suggest is a closer, let's see if I can write this down here and if we can still see it. This thing called church is really closer to a democracy. Now, again, don't get all worked up if it's not perfect in your full understanding, but here's really what this is. What this is saying, listen, our pastor is the spiritual leader of our church, and he is called of the Lord to serve our church. Now, in the human sense, the board went through the process to find him and select him or her as our pastor. But once that person's in place, they are really seeking the mind of the Lord for the vision of the church. And in doing so, they would spread it amongst the board and help the board come along to the understanding of the vision, the direction of the church. Then ultimately, if they're staff, spread it there, and ultimately out to the congregation. It really is a pastor and a board working together. It's not the pastor working for the board. It's the pastor called of the Lord working in leadership with the board to carry the vision of the Lord forward. So I hope that makes some sense to you. So this is not what church government is. This is a closer picture to what it is. And now you've got to understand this in your own mind before you wing it and try to get them to understand it. So you have to have these pieces in place. Now, there are 5 responsibilities, major responsibilities of board members that I want to articulate here for you today. And I think if you get these in place and can help board members understand, the operative word in all this is to understand these roles and responsibilities, you're going to be way down the line in helping your board be all it needs to be. Number 1, their primary responsibility while serving in the board is to pray. They need to be men and women deeply committed to prayer. Number 1, they need to be praying for their church. Most board members would get that, and they would do so. They need to be praying for their pastor. Most board members get that and would do so. Here's one that they don't do very frequently. I don't hear a lot of this, and that is to pray for each other. And I'm going to suggest to you that if you can get a church board praying for each other around the table, you are going to mitigate many of the conflicts that arise in church board settings where one board member is against another board member. Let me also state to you that this business of prayer is more than, Lord, just bless Pastor. Bless him and his family. And Lord, when you're done with that, bless him. I mean, how many of us have prayed like that? When I'm talking about prayer, I'm talking about on your face before God, seeking the Lord for our pastor, for our church, and for each other as board members. And when you do that, you're going to set the stage for very good things to happen at your church. So you need to help them understand their responsibility to pray. Secondly, you've got to help them understand their responsibility to advise. Now let me tell you, I want to give you a little illustration here. Sometimes when I'll talk to boards about advising, they'll say, oh yeah. In other words, I'm just a rubber stamp for whatever the pastor wants to do. Oh, not so fast. You are not a rubber stamp. But being a spiritual advisor is a high calling. I'll give you this illustration, dabbling in politics, so don't get all worked up if you don't line up with my politics. I'll try not to mess you up too bad. I did not vote for President Obama in 2008. True confession. I did not vote for President Obama in 2012. I will not support whoever Barack Obama, President Obama, endorses for 2016. Now, you can tell my political colors, okay, relax on it if you take the other side of it. But here's the point I want you to hear. If President Obama called me tomorrow and asked me to serve as an advisor in his administration, you don't think I'd take a real hard look at that? I would consider that a very high calling. To serve a president who I don't align with philosophically, but if he asked me to serve as an advisor to him, it's a very high calling. And if you're a board member, a leader in the church who's been called or chosen to serve as a board member, you have a high calling to serve as an advisor to the lead pastor. Serve as spiritual counsel to that person. You're not the boss man. You're not the guy that says, hey, this is, or gal, this is what you're supposed to do. But you walk alongside them in spiritual counsel. Nowhere in Scripture do board members dictate the direction and vision given to the pastor. It all comes from the Lord through the pastor, then through the board and the staff and the church. And then second, I guess the other component of that is to actually see what is in Scripture in Acts chapter 6, where board members are chosen because they're what? They're servants. They are there to serve the pastor. They are there to serve the church. Now, let's go on to the second responsibility that we have in advising is a fiduciary responsibility. You have a responsibility to watch the numbers and the books. You're not the holder of the purse strings. You are there to walk and work with the pastor to do good business practices in the church and to move the church forward. Number 3, responsibility is to serve, is to care for the needs of the ministry and for the facilities, the property. And that's a take right off of what was talked about there in the book of Acts, is to care for people. I mean, in that portion of Scripture, the widows were being neglected, and they needed people to serve. The fourth responsibility is to give. A board that cultivates generosity, financially and spiritually, will see unbelievable things happen and come to the church as a result of that. I mean, let's think about this. The blessing of the Lord flows through to a church where generosity abounds. Now, when I'm talking about this, I'm generally talking about this in two different areas. I'm generally talking about this in the area of compensation of staff, and I'm also talking about it in the expression of giving to missions. Let's put it this way. I will talk to church boards and pastors about this. Let's suppose a church board says, we're not giving those guys a raise. For goodness sakes, we didn't get a raise at my place of work. We're not giving them a plud nickel. They got an easy job as pastor. No raises. We're not going to give to missions. That missionary calls and wants money. They've got the easiest job in the world. We never know what they're doing on the other side of the world. We're giving them $10 a month, and we've been doing so for 20 years, and that's plenty. And then that same board member goes like this. Oh, Lord, pour down your manifold blessings on us and our church, and just bless us abundantly, Lord. You got a little confusion there? I mean, how can you be stingy with staff and missions and then expect the Lord to bless you? I mean, think about it with your kids. I mean, do you love to give to a kid who's stingy and ungrateful? Of course not. The board is the entity that sets the stage for what the Lord is going to do in terms of blessing the church financially and otherwise. Develop giving and a culture of generosity. Fifth, self-police. Now, sometimes people say, self-police? I mean, what's up with that, Dick? Let me just paint the picture for you. You got 5 board members around there and the pastor. And everybody is in agreement on something except one board member who's going sideways. And we're going to talk about that here in one of the subsequent videos. So what do you do when that happens? But let's just suppose that's happened. Who do we think's responsibility it is to fix that board member? You got it. We all say it's the pastor's job to fix them. So pastor, go over and fix that board member who's going sideways on us. And I would suggest to you, it's not the pastor's responsibility. It can secondarily be his responsibility, but it is all of us around that table. We have to help board members understand that we all have accountability to each other. That's where the prayer for each other comes into play at the first part of this video we're talking about, and it manifests itself when you now have to deal with somebody going sideways. You have to help the board understand their responsibility to self-police. Now, if the self-policing isn't happening, then we're going to start into the Matthew 18 process, and we're going to involve the pastor and so on and so on. But initially, when conflicts arise at the board level, you've got to help board members understand their responsibility to self-police. Now, in all these things, you have to be regular in describing these things to board members. You can't just say it once and then just say, okay, I told them 3 years ago and they're supposed to get it. No, You've got to regularly be doing that. And it kind of looks like this. Consistency is everything. I mean, isn't it true in our relationships? We want to hear, we don't need to hear just something once, we need to hear it over and over and over. We need to hear it in a consistent way. Regularity is everything. You need to be doing this to help people understand their roles, helping board members get it of how they're supposed to function, not functioning like this, but functioning in a role where God, the pastor, the board, the staff, the church all flow together to accomplish His will for the great church you serve. I got to tell you, this has been so invigorating for me to be able to talk with you on the whole subject of understanding roles and responsibilities of board members. I hope you found it of value. And I got to tell you, in the next video, we're going to talk about how to navigate change with your board. Change is a subject that comes up all the time, and when it does, frequently, one of the first blocks that happens is when a pastor is unable to navigate what he believes is the vision from the Lord in navigating the change that has to happen with the church board. I think you're going to find that of extremely high value. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Until next time, make it a great day and be blessed.